afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute honor to be here. My first time in Dubai, and I have 5 less minutes than I thought I would, so I'm going to just go right into it as quickly as possible. Shop, I was a founding partner of Shop, and as most of us know us mostly as a New York architect, but in recent years we've been building around the country and around the world. I think that one of the most important things for us is really this notion of texture and materiality and thinking about what's next in modernism and the kind of integration of planning and public space and surfaces and skins and using technology to produce them to make these buildings that really have this kind of texture and form that to us is really beautiful but also is incredibly performative. So I'm just going to show 3 buildings, one that just finished, one that's almost under construction, and one that we're in foundations, all 3 in New York, but for us are definitely a new departure in the way that we've been thinking about buildings. The first one is the American Copper Building, which are 2 towers on the east side of Manhattan. They had a very difficult master plan with a school on the southeast corner and a park on the northwest corner, which meant that the park would be in shade all the time. It was just 2 volumes of space that were not incredibly inspired as far as a master plan. Our client just said, what could you do with this? So we said, what if we just shifted the floor plates from the north to the south on one tower, from the east to the west on the other? And then we were required to build this public park. And we said, could we make a park between the 2 buildings? If one is for the public, could there be a public park for the residents? And so the idea was to build a bridge, a sky bridge, something we've heard quite a bit about over the last couple days, that would create one amenities package for the entire building, one fantastic one instead of 2 mediocre ones. And then we put all the mechanical equipment on one tower, used the bridge as a sort of extension plug, and cleared the roof of the other tower for an extended space. So the idea was these 2 folding buildings with a copper facade on the north and south and glass on the east and west. And of course, the trick was not from the structural standpoint. The whole trick with building the building was dealing with the mechanicals and the shifting floor plates. We worked with Bureau Happold on this project. They did a phenomenal job. And then it's a very standard apartment. These are rental apartments. It's what's called an 80-20, which means 20% of it is affordable units. So we had a very limited budget on this project, and our client challenged us to see what we could do. So these were the renderings. We chose a live copper that came like a shiny penny. It's aged to a brown, and over the coming decades will turn to Statue of Liberty green. So here are the buildings as they were just getting finished. And the view from the west, so that you look directly at the river to the east and right at the skyline to the west. Most people thought the river views would be the more important ones. In fact, more people rented the skyline views than they did the waterfront views, which we thought was pretty interesting. And that's an unfortunately pixelated image of the way that the bridge worked, but in order for it to negotiate between the 2 folding surfaces, it was bent in both directions. There hadn't been a bridge built in New York City in almost 40 years, so we did not have the skill set in the construction unions to build it. But it's a 3-story bridge that really has the sort of heart of the building itself. And then my favorite part was we put the swimming pool on the bridge so that you could swim from one tower to the other. And we did all the interiors as well, and then the sort of pattern of the copper and the folding facade. And then it's right at a ferry stop, so it's got great connectivity, even though it's in Kips Bay, which I can guarantee you is about the most boring neighborhood in all of New York City. And the building was underwritten at $70 a square foot, and because of the design, they were achieving over $90 a square foot. So just again, even though it's an 80-20 building, a very simple structure, a very difficult master plan, just by sort of using technology and a little bit of creativity and taking some risks on the sky bridge and everything else, we were really proud of what we accomplished. The next building I'll show you is a building that we're just in foundations now for at 9 DeKalb. This will be the first super tall outside of Manhattan. It'll be over 1,100 feet in downtown Brooklyn. And it was a very tricky site, sort of at a triangular site along Fulton, DeKalb, and Flatbush Avenue in downtown Brooklyn. And there was a landmark same thing, bank, at the, on the site. And in New York, there are exterior landmarks are plentiful, but interior landmarks are actually even more rare and special, and this was both. And our client had bought the site, and really the only way, this was the interior of the bank. It was in bad condition. The only way to we could have stayed off the landmark, but it really would have made this large slab building. And so we made an argument to landmarks and to the city, and we said, look, 100 years ago, the way they dealt with this sort of triangular site was through a series of six-sided stars and hexagons. And why don't we just think of the site in the same way? So the dark blue is the exterior landmark, the light blue is the interior landmark. And we took that triangulation and brought it across the site. And we made a tower that was a series of interlocking hexagons. And one of the interesting things about Brooklyn is that all the grids are arranged in different orders. So where in Manhattan, there's the primary of the avenues and the secondary of the streets, this building is going to be the tallest building in Brooklyn, and there's no other site zoned for any building this tall. And it's going to be 400 feet taller than any other building. So you'll always be seeing this as a tower. And as a born and raised New Yorker, I took that as a great responsibility to make a kind of icon that would stand the test of time there. So the idea was that there was no primary facade, and we did a kind of spiral of setbacks as it went up on the tower. And then we started to think of this notion of crenellation, and crenellation as it appears both in nature, in historical buildings like fluting on columns, and then was there this idea of a kind of contemporary crenellation. The color palette went from black stainless steel to bronze to white enamel. And what we did was we abstracted literally thousands of shapes and forms from the building and just made this kit and started to do hundreds of combinations of the different ways of taking those pieces into the facade. I think we made over 700. We photographed them with the light going back and forth so that we could see what it would look like as the day progressed and the light went across the facade. And then you ended up with this kind of system that both helped with the acceleration on the building by creating turbulence on the facade, but then also helped us with articulating the setbacks as it went up, and changed in color from sort of more on the bronze and more lower and more to the black as it went higher. We did very large scale models in the office where we kept moving the interior and the exterior and changing it around. And one of the things that I think is really nice about this building was that even though it's got to be mostly a glass building because it's residential, we didn't want it to feel like a glass building. And I think that that's where a lot of our work is moving right now, is how do we really think about materiality on facades so that everything isn't just a taut surface, a taut reflective surface. So because it's a series of hexagons, you will, no matter which direction you're looking at the building, you will always see two of the facades in the oblique. And by giving this kind of texture to the building, it makes two of the facades always look solid when you look at the building, even though it really is a glass building. And so this was the model of it in our office, and what this will look like as it goes under construction in downtown Brooklyn. The sort of relationship between the historic base and the tower, and we had to fill out the rest of the block with a base building. And so then that became pretty tricky for us, thinking about, we certainly didn't want to mimic or have anything to do with nostalgia of the historic building, but started to think about this idea of something that would connect in order to get our approvals from landmarks. So we took both the concave fluting and the convex fluting for the 5-story pilasters that create the base of the building, and we brought them together in what we call the convexicave. And the convexicave will be done with a 5-axis mill out of solid marble, 70 feet tall, and create this sort of pattern around the outside of the base of the building as it connects to the landmark structure. And here you can see how it goes from the convex to the flat to the concave in the single element, capped with a sort of bronze detailing. And as it comes towards the front, And then we opened up the back of what was the historic bank so that it could be seen from Flatbush Avenue, again, which is the main thoroughfare, and then that becomes the sort of main entrance to the retail and to the building itself. And so you're putting a 1,100-foot giant ribbed black building in the middle of Brooklyn, and so I just felt like we wanted to put cherry garden trees, so there was just a little bit of pink fluff at the bottom to kind of soften it up. And then we created the roof of the historic building as the amenity spaces and put the pool around the dome so that the historic dome comes up out of the water and you can swim around the pool and the dome that way. And then this will be looking, this is from the South Street Seaport or from Fort Greene Park or from in front of the Barclays Center. So a pretty wonderful building, again, with a phenomenal client, and we're excited that this one is getting built. And I'll wrap up with the last building that I'll talk about, which is 111 West 57th Street, which is a 435-meter tall building that is only 18 meters wide. So it will be at 23.5 to 1, the most slender super tall in the world. And the argument on this building was that New York has this long history of sort of the low rise and the soaring tower. We looked at the buildings that New Yorkers love. And it wasn't that they were historical. It was really the thing that we kept pulling out of it was definitely texture, but it was also proportion. And of course, buildings like the Woolworth Building, where Shop is headquartered, 1 Wall Street, 30 Rock, these were all office buildings. They were pre-World War II. They were small because you needed light and you didn't have air conditioning. And they created a particular kind of skyline. But then, of course, post-World War II, you have the sort of more efficient floor plate, the air conditioning. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them are less beautiful. It's not that we like them or don't like them. It just creates a very different skyline. And right now we're at this moment where there are these half dozen to a dozen super talls that are being built in New York, which of course are all about the proposition of technologically being able to get that high, but the ability to get the view of Central Park. And it's a purely economic function. So these half dozen are going up. And while it's only our building is only a 60 by 80 floor plate, that's in feet, I'm sorry, so like 18 by 27 meters. The Chrysler Building was only 90 by 90, so it's really not that different, even though it seems tremendously different. We looked at the history of the setback in New York and said, what can we do to play with that notion? And so we looked at the sort of historical way that a setback was done. We looked at the contemporary way that everyone's doing it by folding the glass facades. And we said, is there something that is a both-and combination, where each pilaster is a setback in and of itself to make this kind of gentle arc for the building to just dissipate in the sky. We loaded all the structure into the east and west facades. It's basically an H of reinforced concrete, and opened up the glass to the north to the park and to the south to the city skyline. It's 1 apartment per floor at 4,800 square feet per unit. And so then you have this really tough shear wall that had some punches in it, but we certainly didn't want anything that was sort of flat and taut. And again, going in this notion of a kind of post-Mannerist idea, we started to play with this notion of each single pilaster becoming, using the sort of traditional materials of terracotta and bronze from those skyscrapers, but using CNC technology to fabricate them in a completely different way. And so there's 26 different shapes of the terracotta, all digitally fabricated. There's 6 different colors of the cream. And so when you look at the building, this image would be from 5th Avenue and 57th Street. So you're looking at what would be the shear wall, but what you get is this sort of rotating terracotta, so that when the light hits it from the south, you get this play of light and shadow on the facade itself as the building goes up to the top. And so here you can see it, and it's a sort of bronze and glass facade on the north and south, and then there's a bronze filigree between those pilasters, and then you see how each pilaster sort of ends with a setback terrace until it goes to the spire. So this is looking at that facade and looking towards the south. And looking up, this is a rendering of what it would look like. We worked very, very closely with our engineers and with the facade manufacturers. Absolutely zero value engineering went into it. Here you can see the first pieces of the facade going up and the bronze filigree. It's a rain screen system. And then to the park was the one place where the client really wanted it to be all glass. So we did these bronze filleted insets below, which almost from the park makes the building look like it has a curved front, even though it's just a flat facade. And this would be when the building is done looking from Central Park West. And this is every apartment has a 60-foot living room, dead center on the park, with 15-foot ceilings. This is clearly not part of our new mayor's affordable housing plans. But kitchens and the bathrooms, I mean, it's pretty, we worked with Bill Sofield, did all the interiors. And then there are duplex and triplex apartments. The apartments come fully finished and furnished. And you know, I'm a hardcore modernist. And like I started drawing this stuff and I said, what am I up to? Like, what is going on? It was very almost disturbing as we went through the whole process. But it's something that I'm actually now, it's really reinvigorated me as a designer in the way that we're starting to think about things. Again, we were able to reuse some of the loading docks for, it was originally Steinway Hall where Steinway pianos were sold. So we were able to reuse the loading docks to get a off-street porte cochere. And here you can see the building as it goes to the top. So the last apartment is a triplex, then there's the mass damper, and then there's about 200 feet of a spire with just a glass and bronze sculpture that light up at night. Here you can see the way the top of the building finishes. We'll pour the last, we just passed 1,000 feet this week. We're gonna pour we'll hit the top of the concrete by the end of the year, and it will be topped out fully by March. But, and then we embedded LEDs where you cannot see them inside the folds and curves of the terracotta. And so that shadow pattern that you see in the day will actually reverse to the opposite at night. But you will never be able to see a light. It's always bounced off the raw material itself. And then this is looking at it from the park. You can see the sculpture up at the spire. And here we are under construction. This was this summer. And the terracotta as it turns the corner. But it's really turned out exactly as we had hoped, and the spaces are pretty remarkable. And I stood up there on the roof of it with my client, Michael Stern of JDS, who happens to be 39 years old. And I said, how many people with as much hair and as little gray hair or as much hair as you have stood at 1,000 feet on the building that they own? And he had a big smile on his face. So the building has been an extraordinary project to work on. Here you can start to see the patterning of the terracotta on the side and what it will look like when it's finished. So you know, it's been an amazing experience to start to work with these super talls, to think about how they're drawn, to think about the materiality, to think about how they connect to a city. This is a building that could only be in New York and should only be in New York. And we really believe in all of our projects is really understanding the local conditions, the context, the materiality, the history, using technology in the most sort of advanced way to bring those two things together, to bring the history and the future into a place at one time. And you know, we always like to say at CHOP that all of sustainable technology is really important, but the most important thing you can do as an architect or engineer or builder or developer is build buildings that people love, that they take care of, and they don't renovate all the time. That is the most sustainable thing you do, that has flexibility and ability to adapt and ability to change, but also the ability to delight and make people really happy when they see them. And while some of these towers, along what they call Billionaires Row, are very controversial, we've had nothing but incredible response to this building, and I think it's because it connects in some way to people. It makes them understand the city or its history or what the future could hold. And so we feel incredibly fortunate to have that opportunity to design buildings like that, and we feel incredibly fortunate to be here to share them with you today. Thank you very much.